Before we can simplify expressions, we need to know some important terms. So if you look at this expression we have here, we have 5x squared minus 7 plus 3x squared. And we have some vocabulary words here. Let's talk about what they mean. Okay? The terms are the parts of an expression that are being added together. And you will put these terms on when you do your breaking down definition sheets. But when we talk about terms, they're the parts of an expression that are being added together. Notice we're not dealing with all adding there, we're dealing with subtraction. So the very first thing you must always do is change all subtraction to addition. That's the very first thing you must do. Otherwise you could go through a whole problem and do everything right, but if you don't change subtraction to addition, you're going to get the wrong answer. Fortunately, changing subtraction to addition isn't hard to do. Keep, change, change. Or subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. If we keep this 5x squared, change the minus to a plus, change 7 to negative 7, now we can rewrite this, and again, if it's a plus sign, we leave it. Now we can write it in terms of all addition. So when we go to list our terms, the parts of an expression that are being added together, we just have to look and see what's being added. 5x is being added to negative 7, which is being added to 3x squared. And I do apologize because this should be 5x squared here. So if we want to see what's being added together, well, 5x squared, comma, is being added to negative 7, comma, which is being added to 3x squared. Simply that's all like terms are. Or I'm sorry, that's all terms are. What's being added together. You basically rewrite it, but instead of plus signs you put it commas. Now like terms have identical variable parts. So if you look at your terms, and remember we just listed our terms, 5x squared, negative 7, and 3x squared, like terms have identical variables. So if you look at these, which ones have identical variables? Well, the 5x squared and the 3x squared. They would be considered like terms. Caution, okay? If you had something like 5x and 4x to the fourth, these are not like terms because their variables aren't identical. X to the first and x to the fourth, although similar because they're both x's, they're not identical. In like terms, you must have identical variable parts. The same is true for numbers without variables. Notice we have a negative 7 here. If we were also to have a 2, they would be considered like terms. Their variable is identical because they don't have a variable. Okay? So understand that sometimes we can have 3 like terms, we can have no like terms, we can have a couple sets of like terms. Now coefficients. Coefficients basically are the numbers attached to the variables. To be a coefficient you have to have a variable, like this x squared here. But it's only the number attached to it. It's only a 5. Does negative 7 have a variable? No. Therefore, it cannot have a coefficient. 3x squared? Well, again, the 3 is attached to the x squared, so the other coefficient would be 3. If you had a simple variable like x, what would the coefficient be? Well, it'd just be 1, because 1's attached to it. Even though we don't write the 1, 1's there. Now constant terms, constants, well if you think of something being constant, it doesn't change. So we're looking for numbers that don't change. If we have 5x squared, that 5x squared can change depending on what number I put in for x. But if you look at the negative 7, no matter what you put in for x, negative 7 is never going to change. So in this case, negative 7 is a constant term. Again, this is why it's important that you change subtraction to addition, because if you put a positive 7 here, it would be marked wrong. Now the very last thing you're going to be asked to do is to simplify. And what it means by simplify is it means to combine your like terms. So if you look at our like terms, basically we have 5x squareds and 3x squareds. How many total x squareds are there? Well, 5 plus 3 is 8, so that's 8x squareds. Don't forget about your negative 7 here. So then we can just say plus a negative 7, or you could say 8x squared minus 7. So let's look at some more examples of simplifying. Notice the directions say simplify the expression. If you look at this here, we have 4x minus x. If it helps, put a 1 in there. Okay, and just think of it as if we have 4 x's and we want to take away one of those x's, how many x's are we left with? Well, 4 minus 1 is just 3x. If you look at this example, we have 4x squared plus 2 minus x to the second. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing we always have to do. Always change subtraction to addition. Now, I apologize. I probably should have done this here and made this 4x plus a negative 1x, but we probably can handle 4 minus 1, so that one wasn't such a big deal. But for something like this, when you start dealing in more than one step, it's important that you change subtraction to addition. So we could go keep, change, change. And if you want, make that a negative 1x. Okay, it's a negative x squared, or you can say it's a negative 1x squared. Now to find your like terms, what I usually do is underline, put a circle around, square something. But if you have 4x squareds and a negative 1x squareds, you're going to combine those. What's 4 plus a negative 1? And you get 3x squared. Again, they're like terms because their variables are identical. Then, what are we left with? Well, we're basically just left with a 2. And there's nothing to add it to, so we can just say 3x squared plus 2. This is the simplified answer. You can't go any further. This does not become 5x squared because remember, like terms have identical variable parts. They don't have identical variables. This is an x squared, this is an any. Okay? Don't be intimidated by the last problem here. Go through and change all your subtraction to addition. Keep, change, change, keep, change, change, and then apply your distributive property. Okay, again, this will just, our 1's just hanging out front here, plus, if we want to get rid of the parentheses, you distribute the negative 4 to the 1 by multiplication. Negative 4 times 1 is a negative 4, plus, you don't have to worry if it's plus or minus if you go through and make everything addition. Don't forget to distribute the negative 4 to the negative 2x. If you go negative 4 times negative 2x, you would get a positive 8x. Now, combine your like terms. In this case, our like terms are 1 and negative 4. They're alike because they don't have variables. 1 plus a negative 4 ends up being negative 3. And then we just have 8x. There's nothing to add to it. So we just end up with a negative 3 plus 8x. Again, stopping there, we cannot take it any further because they are not like terms. And so that's basically just your answer. Again, we can use the distributive property to help us simplify, and you want to use your idea of terms, like terms, coefficients, and constants to simplify as well.